Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood, and I'm here to do a Dark Shadows video that will be entitled Dark Shadows from the Beginning. And I'm glad I actually got a little better lighting in here now, a little bit. So you should be able to see me with this video. This video, before I get into what Dark Shadows was, what the beginning of this was, and I'm going to do the whole series, not in 1 month, but throughout, and I'm going to start with the beginning. But this video was inspired by a fellow writer and a friend of mine, John Philip Betancourt. Shout out to him. He's the Return of Dark Shadows. And also, it was inspired by a fellow YouTuber of mine who I know. He's a friend of mine too, sorry. Mag1981 at I_Barnabas. You can also hit him at Mag1981. There's going to be a link in the description box to his channel and to John Philip Betancourt's blog in the description box for this. But I was talking to him last night, like yesterday I think this was, or what is Dark Shadows? And Dark Shadows is many things, so I'm going to go this from the beginning. You see a train and you hear the train, and then you go inside the train and you see this woman sitting there, and they do this voiceover, and the actress's name is Alexandra Moltke. At the time in the 60s, her name's Alexander Isles now, obviously. And Alexander's tells you that her name is she's playing a character called Victoria Winters, and the character is on this train, on this journey. She tells you she's going to a place high on top Widow's Hill to meet people who are only shadows in her mind. And it's something so interesting because once they cut from her, you meet Elizabeth Collins Stoddard, who's played by the late great Joan Bennett, and you meet Roger Collins, who's played by the late great Louis Edmonds. And they're having a discussion / argument over the arrival of this girl. And you might say, well, who's against it? Who's for it? Elizabeth is for it. She's bringing the girl here. Roger is against someone coming to work with his son. And their discussion is as such as, why bring someone all the way up here who you don't even know? And Roger makes that point so well. Louis Edmonds, the way he played Roger, I think he just does not get enough credit for sort of being the early somewhat antagonist. And Burke wasn't the only, people say Burke was the antagonist. Burke wasn't the only one. There were many antagonists throughout Dark Shadows history. Roger and Burke could both be either or at times, depending on how they felt. I'm not trying to do retrospectives with this video, I'm just saying. But what happens is, once they have this argument, Roger breaks a glass cup in his hand, and you cut back to the train, and you see Victoria flashing back to the Hammond Foundling Home, which is an orphanage where she grew up. Victoria Winters is an orphan. So she received a letter, and it tells you she also received a letter from Elizabeth Collins Stoddard from Collinsport / Collinwood, Maine, requesting her for a job, a position of governess, that they want her to be the governess of David Collins, his tutor. So here's this woman, Elizabeth Collins Stoddard, who you just met, who does not know this girl, seemingly, and that Miss Hopewell says to her, I've never heard of her, and Miss Hopewell's telling the truth. And so Victoria Winters, why would she off? She's even wondered, why would she offer me the position? I've never heard of her. And Miss Hopewell even says, well, maybe she's heard of you. And she goes, but how? She goes, I don't know. So the interaction is interesting. Miss Hopewell is telling Victoria she doesn't know how she heard of Victoria, but maybe she did somehow. You know, it's a very interesting situation that this woman is going all the way to Collinsport, Maine, to Collinwood to find, not just take a job, but to find out why this woman wants her specifically. But also, there's all ulterior motive. Victoria Winters, while she was in Hammond Fallon Home, had been receiving money, in an envelope, and it was postmarked Bangor, Maine. The post, and Bangor is only 50 miles from Collinsport, so it's not, or I think 15, but I think it's 50. I forget, but so it's not that far away. So she's wondering, could there be a connection? So she's going for that. Yeah, she's going for the job too, but she has a motive to go. She wants to find out who she is, who her parents were. This girl has no idea who her parents were. And you might say, well, how does she have the name Victoria Winters? Victoria, she was left on the step of the Hammond Fallon home in a box saying, with a note saying her name is Victoria. I cannot take care of her. And she was left in the middle of winter, so Victoria Winters. That's how people call her Winters, Victoria Winters. And once she gets to, now on the train with her, before, I don't want to jump, is a man she has no idea that's going to cause a lot of problems for her employee, and that's one Burke Devlin, who's played by Mitchell Ryan. And Mitchell Ryan in this role is really, really good. If you have not seen Mitchell Ryan as Burke Devlin, I highly recommend you do go watch the beginning episodes of Dark Shadows. He was amazing. It's something he was something else. And they both get off the train stops at Collinsport station. They get off, and no one is there to greet her or even meet her. That's what kind of reception this girl is getting. She's getting the cold shoulder treatment. And she says, they're talking, and he offers her a ride into town. And he does ask her, where are you going? She goes, I'm going up to Collinwood. Do you know it? And he goes, yes, very well. So Burke is telling you he knows Collinwood, which means he knows the Collins family. You just don't know how. And they get to the hotel, and the clerk, what was his name? Mr. Wells. Mr. Wells, he goes to greet Burke, and Burke Devlin stonewalls him. I wired for 3 rooms, on the top floor. So he requested his bags to be taken up, and the one bag is the girls, which is Victoria Winters. And Victoria wants a taxi, and they say, well, they just have to get the tire fixed. And she said she would wait, and he said that's fine. And after Burke sort of leaves, he gets a note saying from someone, you don't know who it is quite yet. And after he leaves, she says to Mr. Wells, you know him, don't you? And he says yes. And he says ever since he was this high, basically telling you, Mr. Wells is telling you, is Burke is from Collinsport, born and raised. He knew Burke when Burke was a little boy. And I think that is so well done by the storytellers in that little piece right there, just to tell you, so wait a second, this guy's from here. So he definitely has a history. And then when she goes into the cafe, she meets the cook slash waitress Maggie Evans, who's wearing a blonde wig, by the way, which is, everyone bitches about the wig. Um, that's why, if you ever watch the beginning episodes, that's why Maggie has blonde hair, but they later remove the wig without explanation. Which I always thought was funny. So they're talking. Burke has told her to go home by this point, by the way. Maggie, her conversation with Maggie, Maggie calls her a jerk. And there's gossip around town that this girl it was coming. So now she's here. So Maggie calls her a jerk. You're a jerk. And she says, well, why am I a jerk? Well, because I got told that you're going to work at Collinwood. Yeah, she says, yes, that's a bet. She goes, well, take one good look at that hair. It'll turn gray. She basically tells her the place, it isn't a place you want to work at or be at. Even though Maggie doesn't go up there, it's just the town gossip is the Collins family is kooks. The Collins family, through some of the people, are very strange. So, and a lot of people view Collinwood as haunted as well. And you sort of get that early feel in the very first episode that there's something off about the house and the family. And later on, after her conversation with Maggie, she does get a ride up to Collinwood where she meets Elizabeth Collins' daughter, Joan Bennett's character. In that process, Burke Devlin meets Wilbur Strake, and Wilbur Strake is a private investigator who's been looking into the Collins family and trying to dig up information and dirt on them for Burke Devlin. Burke Devlin has become a wealthy man. So the very first episode, really, there's no vampire, there's no ghost. I mean, there's hints of something wrong. Just in the first episode, something's off. And really not just with the Collins family, but with the town. Just the people there. Maggie, Mr. Wells seems nice. You have Burke Devlin. Then in the Blue Whale, you have the younger people. So in the first episode, you have a mix and a variety of things where there's different things going on. And, Dark Shadows did not start with Barnabas, obviously. He's not until way, way, way later. And this woman, Victoria Winters, she goes through pure hell in these beginning episodes, and she goes through so much, and there's so much to get into. So she goes through, talking to Elizabeth. She goes through dealing with Roger not liking her, and Roger is a very maniacal person. Him and Burke, they really were best friends because they're 1 and 1A. I would say Roger's more the vindictive one as well towards Vicky, towards Victoria. And with Victoria, she keeps poking, well, why did you send for me? Why did she does ask, but she gets sort of stonewalled. Oh, you were recommended, somebody recommended you to my brother. Well, it was someone who is associated with the Hammond Family Home. Well, no, they asked to remain anonymous. Well, I'd like to send them a thank you. They said no, they'd like to remain anonymous. Lo and behold, what you find out is, Roger's son David is very evil at times in these early episodes, and he tortures Vicky. So does Roger. Um, that David tells Vicky, "I hate you. Go away." He doesn't like her, and it's like, how bad is David? David Collins removes the bleeder valve from his dad's car, causing his brakes to fail, and get into a car crash and get hurt, not killed. And obviously, by this time, what you found out is Burke Devlin was convicted of manslaughter and spent 5 years in prison. And Burke knows deep down he did not commit that manslaughter, but jury saw otherwise. And you've also been introduced to Sam Evans by this time. Sam Evans, who's the father of Maggie Evans. Sam Evans is a drunk. The town has become the town drunk and is the town drunk, but he seemingly always wasn't that way because he paints. He's a painter. So it's very interesting to know that this woman who came to a place she did not know, people she did not know, and they're all telling her one thing, especially, most of them, Roger, Burke, Maggie, and Sam Evans, go home. And it's very presumptuous because this woman has no home to go home to, really. She's an orphan. She could probably go back to the Hammond Family home, but she doesn't want to in a lot of ways. And I do love how Victoria Winter sort of somewhat calls her bluff. She does threaten to leave, but they beg her to stay. Even Carolyn at first does tell her to go home, but she says that's just talk. I love how her and Carolyn met in the original series. It was very good. She goes up to Victoria's room. But by the way, you also, in the Blue Whale, Burke Devlin breaks up a fight when Joe Haskell and Carolyn Stoddard are dancing together. Joe's going to fight this guy who's trying to dance with Carolyn because they're boyfriend and girlfriend. He breaks up the fight. He tells her to go home before he takes her over his knee, and he tells Haskell to come back, and he makes Haskell an offer, and Haskell says, "No, I'm not. I can't tell you anything I don't know, and even if I did, I wouldn't." Which makes you like Joe right away. Joe's a noble guy. So that's part of the beginning. I'm not going to get into all of it, obviously, because there's the Phoenix arc to get into, and there's other things. Just know Victoria's arrival does set things off into motion. You know what? I'm just going to continue to talk for a while. Victoria's arrival sets off many things. And not just Victoria's arrival, Burke Devlin's arrival. It sets off Bill Malloy, who doesn't want to see Liz Stoddard hurt by Burke. He doesn't give a shit about Roger. Roger, to him, when you meet Bill Malloy, who's the head of the fishing fleet, you can tell one thing. Bill was in love with Elizabeth. And maybe they once were lovers. That's always been the sort of innuendo between them. They may have loved one another at one point in time. And you can somewhat tell that in the series a little bit. Elizabeth did respect Bill, and Bill respected Elizabeth. You're also introduced to the caretaker, Matthew Morgan, who's a bit of an old man. He's a nut job. So Victoria Winter's arrival brings about the frustrations of Roger because he doesn't want anyone working with his son. He just wants to send his son away. Plus, Burke Devlin's arrival brings about the frustrations of Roger of panic of being found that he's hiding something and he doesn't want it found out. And what he doesn't want found out is that Burke is right. He wasn't the one driving that car. Roger was. Um, and that's sort of something I'm going to leave you with hanging. There's just so much to get into, and I hope I've sort of helped out with these early episodes, with these somewhat beginning episodes. Victoria Winters does see a ghost after she finds David runs away after confronting him about the bleeder valve, finding it in his drawer. And she does see a ghost, she during a thunderstorm, very violent thunderstorm, and so she does see a ghost. So I hope I've been informative. I want to give a shout out to, again, John Philip Betancourt, and the link's going to be in the description box for his blog. That's at Return Shadows. That's also at Poprack. You can also shout out to Mag 1981. Link's going to be in the description box for his channel. You can also get him on Twitter at Mag1981 or at I_Barnabas. I want to give a shout out to those two gentlemen. I want to give a shout out to at Dark Shadows Twitter. And just everybody in general. Listen, I think it's important that you know what Dark Shadows started off as, and this was indeed a gothic soap opera. There was gothic feel long before you ever saw the first Ghost, and so many things set that in motion with these early episodes, with the very first early episodes. With Victoria's arrival, once she gets to Collinsport, you could just, something feels off. And not just about the house, about the town, about Widow's Hill. Everything feels off. And you just can't help but wonder what that is. And that's what made Dark Shadows so appealing in those early episodes. Something feels off. So again, just want to give those shout outs. Thank you to those gentlemen. I also want to give a shout out to Cynthia Robinson and Kathy Cox. I want to give a shout out to her. I talked to them on Facebook. Shout out to Patrick McCray. Shout out to Will McKinley. Shout out to at Cousin Barnabas. Shout out to everybody. Listen, like I said, it's important you go if you're really going to want to get into Dark Shadows. And this just isn't for Dark Shadows fans to listen to. This is for people who want to know about Dark Shadows, like the very beginning of it. Don't just assume it was about Barnabas. Go actually research the product, because there's more to it than the vampire. It didn't start with a vampire for sure. It started very, very differently. But again, even in the very beginning, you could feel something was very off. And with what was going on with the environment. The environment itself is what made the setting, I would say, very supernatural prior to you ever seeing the first Ghost. And the actors and actresses sold that there was something off, not just the writers. The writers did a great job. So, I'm going to sign off here. I'm going to tag y'all in the shout out. So, you guys have a good one. Like, share, comment, subscribe.